John Thune. He's a Republican from South Dakota. He's a Republican leader. He's the chairman of the Senate Republican Conference, chairman of the Senate Commerce, Science, and Transportation Committee as well. Hey, Senator, thanks very much for joining us.
Good afternoon, Wolf. Nice to be with you.
And congratulations. Republicans are now the majority in the U.S. Senate, 54 Republicans, 46 Democrats, among them 2 of those independents. So is this a good idea to raise the gas tax right now with the price per gallon pretty low?
It certainly wouldn't be my preference, Wolf. We've got a whole bunch of people who have made suggestions out there. We have some senators who have proposed a gas tax increase. We have some senators who have proposed using energy development as a pay-for. We've got some senators who have proposed tax reform and using repatriated funds from multinational corporations, offshore earnings coming back in and helping that fund infrastructure. So there's a whole bunch of proposals out there. And one thing I do know is we have a deadline, May 31st. We have to come up with a resolution to this issue. And obviously what we've done in the past is not sufficient. We've now to the tune of $62 billion, borrowed money out of the general fund, transferred it, and used it to replenish the shortfall in the Highway Trust Fund. And all that does is add it to the debt and hand the bill to our children and grandchildren. If we're going to have infrastructure, we've got to come up with a way of financing it, and there are a number of proposals out there, all of which I think will probably be discussed in the days ahead.
If you could get a revenue neutral way of doing it, in other words, raise the tax, the federal gas tax, but at the same time lower taxes elsewhere, is that something you'd be open to?
Well, I think that that would have to be. I don't think there's any way that anything would pass a Republican Congress that had any net tax increase. So it would have to be a reduction elsewhere in the tax code. But I do think that one thing that has been talked about that's gaining some traction, gaining some favor in both the House and the Senate, and we've had conversations with both, and as well as with the administration obviously is looking for a solution to this as well, is that if we could do something on tax reform that would lower rates overall, go to a new tax system when it comes to business taxation, and get a lot of those offshore earnings brought back into the United States, that you might be able to find a way to not only reform the tax code and lower rates, but also fund infrastructure in this country. So that's something that's being talked about. I would say right now that's probably the idea that has the most currency and is getting the most support. But like I said, there are a number of proposals that are out there, all of which I think will probably be discussed as we get into trying to come up with a solution to this issue.
You've just posted an op-ed on CNN.com, Senator. You said Republicans want to get right to work on job-creating legislation, starting with the legislation to approve the Keystone XL pipeline. Just a little while ago, just a few minutes ago, the White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest spoke about the Keystone pipeline. I want you to listen because he made news.
Would you consider putting Keystone in some sort of overall legislative package where you give some things, you get some things in return?
Well, I mean, I haven't heard any Republicans, float that as a possible measure. So I think I'd withhold judgment on that. But I think the president has been pretty clear that he does not think that circumventing a well-established process for evaluating these projects is the right thing for Congress to do.
And he also went on to say the president will not sign into law the Keystone pipeline legislation, assuming it passes the House and the new Republican majority in the Senate. Your reaction?
Well, that's a disappointment to us, Wolf, and I think it's the president fails his first big test when it comes to whether or not he wants to work with Congress. Saying that somehow this is circumventing a process. This process has been in place now for 6, 7, 8 years. There have been multiple environmental impact statements done. All the analysis that can be done has been done. It's time to make a decision. The president doesn't want to make a decision, and I think he is listening to his left-wing base. A lot of folks in the extreme environmental community I think, have his ear on this issue, and it's unfortunate because it's going to stand in the way, really, of getting something I think a majority of Americans want, and something for which there is bipartisan support here in Congress. We'll have a lot of Democrats in the Senate and in the House as well that will vote for this. The question is, do we have a sufficient number if the president vetoes it to override the veto? And I think that's the question we don't know the answer to at this point.
Well, in other words, you think you have at least 60 votes to overcome a filibuster attempt, but you might not have 67 votes or whatever you need to override a veto. Is that what you need to override a veto?
That's correct. And if people vote the way that they have in the past, and those who've expressed support for Keystone Pipeline on the Democrat side, we would have the necessary filibuster-proof majority. We'll get 60 or north of there, but 67, of course, is a higher threshold. that becomes a more difficult hill, obviously, but it's very disappointing to hear the president say what he said. I think this, to me, is a signal, certainly first signal, about how he wants to work with the new majority in the Congress.
Did you get that invitation to go to the White House with the congressional leadership next Tuesday? Because apparently the White House is inviting the Democratic and Republican leadership to the White House next Tuesday. I assume you'll be invited.
Correct. We have been, and we'll look forward to that meeting, and I hope that we can have a conversation that leads to some solutions for the country, and that the president will decide to meet us halfway. There are certainly Republicans in Congress who want to get things done, but it's going to require a president who wants to step forward and provide the necessary leadership to make that happen.
John Thune, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks, Wolf.